Hi everyone, welcome back to Connect HR Hangouts. It's your favorite sizzling host, Palesa Mahloele. We are back with episode 8 of season 2, and we are so excited to have you here. If you're a returning subscriber, thank you so much for your loyalty and support. We thank you for commenting in the comment section, and please don't forget to like and share this episode. And if you're new here, welcome. Welcome. And we hope that you enjoy it here. In studio today, I've got my most favorite guest of the season. We are seated here with Dr. Palesa Mahloele Munzara. How are you doing?
I'm so good. I'm so excited to be here as well.
I'm excited that you're here. It's your time to shine. Please let our people know who Palesa is, where she's from, everything about you.
There's a lot. Everything is a lot.
Go for it.
I'll try compress it into a little nutshell.
Okay.
As you mentioned, I'm Palesa. I grew up in a small town called Jobetina. A lot of people give me that look when I tell them that.
Where's Jobetina?
It's in the northwest.
Okay.
It is close to Potchefstroom, if you've heard of Potchefstroom. It's in Flagstop. So I grew up there most of my childhood. And then I moved to Johannesburg and I started my high school here in Joburg. But then I very quickly moved to Cape Town. I love Cape Town. It's actually my favorite city in the world.
Yeah.
And anyone who knows me will tell you that. Did the rest of my high school years in Cape Town.
Okay.
And then I went on to study at UCT. I did my undergrad in organizational psychology and human resource management. I actually thought I wanted to go into trade unions.
Okay.
At the time, I didn't quite understand what it entailed. But I did end up doing my postgrad in marketing, and that's where my career actually started in marketing. So much of my professional background has been in brand marketing.
Okay.
And I've worked across a number of industries, across a number of multinational organizations in brand marketing in various roles. And it is in working in those large organizations with different types of people from different walks of life, different geographies, that I got to really get an appreciation for inclusivity and building inclusive workspaces and the importance thereof. I also got to understand the vital importance of inclusive marketing. And there are so many marketing faux pas that we've seen where you can clearly see a lack of inclusivity
100%
in communication. And so in working with people from different geographies, different nationalities, et cetera, and in living in different countries as well. I spent some time living in South Korea, living and working there, and some time in the UK as well. I did my master's there. I just started becoming curious about human difference. And on my own started to research and read a lot around us as human beings, what makes us different, the impact of our various intersecting identities and how that just impacts the way we operate and behave and work with each other as human beings. This led me to pursuing my PhD in critical diversity studies. And then I started working in this field, primarily focusing on inclusion in the workplace, in its various different forms and various different aspects. That's me in a very nutshell. That's really compressed.
We have all day, but okay. No, that's amazing, Palesa. And I think you're the perfect person for today's topic, which is unconscious bias. I think people don't know that such a thing exists. So we'd like to know from you, what is unconscious bias and how does it affect decision-making in the workplace?
I often say, as practitioners in this space, we get caught up in language and jargon, and saying like unconscious bias, what is it? I don't know what it is. Quite simply, it's those preconceived notions that we hold because we are human beings that are raised in different families, come from different communities, and as a result hold different beliefs. And those beliefs form and shape how we perceive one another and get us to certain stereotypes. And so unconscious bias is when there's conscious bias and there's unconscious bias. Okay. So the key difference between the two lies in awareness and intent. Where conscious bias is when you know that you hold certain preconceived notions about people, about certain people, and you go ahead and make decisions intentionally and deliberately, knowing that they are informed by these biases that you hold. So, for example, you might be a hiring manager looking to recruit somebody into your team, and you choose to not employ a certain candidate who is perfectly qualified for the role on the basis of their race, for instance, and you know it. And you make that deliberate choice because you want to keep your team a certain race, for example. Where unconscious bias is something that kind of often slips through the door unnoticed. Where you might be somebody that actually believes in diversity, believes in inclusion, believe you promote it, and you do promote it. But you also hold certain preconceived notions because you're a human being as well, who's been shaped by so many different societal beliefs, family beliefs, religious beliefs, etc., etc. And so you also make decisions that are influenced by these biases that you don't know that you hold. So, for example, if we go back to the same example, you might be somebody that interviews a candidate, and you unconsciously choose to not hire this person because they just don't feel familiar. They don't sound like you. They didn't go to your school. You've never heard of Jobetina, where they come from. They just are an unfamiliar person to you. And we call this affinity bias, where you're making a decision on the basis of familiarity. So you might choose to hire somebody because you went to the same varsity or because you went to the same school. When we think of like old boys clubs, they're very much grounded on affinity bias. We went to the same school, and on that basis, I'm going to hire you. Whether you're perfectly qualified or not. So that's the key difference really between conscious and unconscious bias. And this affects decisions in the workplace, for example, by the examples I just shared, where you just taking these preconceived notions, these stereotypes that you hold, and they inform hiring decisions, promoting decisions, development decisions, any kind of decisions, who you engage with in meetings even.
Sure, that's amazing. And on the topic of unconscious bias, can it be completely eliminated?
It cannot. I don't believe it can. Because we will always be people who are influenced by our social context. However, that being said, we can train our minds to make bias-free decisions. So we are able to build bias blockers, as we call them. So you educate yourself, you raise awareness within yourself around biases and biases that you hold. And then you train yourself to be critical in your decision making, to constantly pause and ask yourself, am I making this decision on the basis of some stereotype that I hold, on the basis of something that I believe or a belief that I was raised with. So although I don't believe we can ever truly completely eliminate biases from ourselves as human beings, I do believe that we can train ourselves to make bias-free decisions.
Sure. Perfect. And how can managers identify and challenge their own unconscious biases?
It's a tricky one, because like I say, unconscious bias is insidious.
Yeah.
It lies beneath the surface of awareness. But as leaders, it's important to be curious.
Yeah.
To not be defensive. And as a starting point to accept that all of us as people hold biases. So there's no one who is a human being who lives on this earth and lives with people that doesn't hold biases. So as a starting point is to just have that within yourself.
Yeah.
And then engage in dialogue. I believe in the power of dialogue. I believe that's how we get to understand ourselves, understand people that we work with, understand teams that we lead. So it's critical that you engage in dialogue, particularly with people who are different from yourself, who come from a different place, who have not been raised the same as you. So to include diverse perspectives in your circle, to include diverse voices when you're hiring, when you are making decisions around who you are going to develop, who you're going to give opportunities to in the workplace.
That's amazing. And which I think it gives birth to the next question, the way you've just responded now. So how can how does unconscious bias impact diversity initiatives in workspaces?
It's so tricky. It impacts it in a lot of ways because it is something that is often unknown.
Yeah.
Even in organizations or even within leaders that promote or believe in diversity, equity, and inclusion, it can creep in because you don't know you have it. So you might sit in panels and talk about, how do we become more inclusive? How do we become more diverse, etc.? And you look at only certain markers. So perhaps you're only looking at gender, you're only looking at race, but then you're not very considerate of other different aspects of inclusivity. So perhaps you're not considering people living with different types of call it disabilities. So you might not be considering that there might be somebody in your team who is perhaps on the spectrum or is autistic in some way and requires rigor and structure in the organization or in the way work is given to them. Yeah. So somebody who's really brilliant at their work, but does require clear instructions, does require a certain type of routine. You're not inclusive. Yes. You're not intentional. So by not being intentional about being inclusive, you end up being exclusive. So people end up getting left behind unintentionally. Or you might have somebody in your team who stutters or has a stammer or some kind of speech impediment, but the organization is an organization that thrives on delivery of spoken word. If you present really well, then you get rewarded, etc., etc. But maybe Palesa is not that great at delivering in spoken word, but she writes really good reports, actually puts together a bloody good presentation, but can't deliver it in an eloquent manner in the way it's expected in the organization. So you end up becoming exclusive in that way. So it's quite important that there is intentionality with organizations and organizational leaders to become all inclusive in the way that the organization operates. And I often say it's about progress over perfection. It's hard to reach a destination, really. So it's important that you're constantly checking yourself as an organization, constantly having dialogue with your team, creating an environment that is psychologically safe, where people feel comfortable enough to express when they are feeling like they're not being included in various ways.
True. And in your introduction about yourself, you mentioned that your role included blending marketing and DEI. How does that work? And I'm just very curious to hear how it interlinks.
So diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging.
Yes.
In organizations is often thought of as an add-on. It's like an additional thing that the company does, a workshop that they run, a training session that they do from time to time. They might run a series of workshops on unconscious bias, for example, something that HR sits with.
Yes.
But it's so important that DEIB initiatives are actually thought of and considered as part of the business strategy. And so when we think about inclusion and diversity in its broadest sense, it needs to be incorporated, whether it's in marketing, operations, whatever different function in the organization. So if we take the example of marketing, for instance, and we think about marketing faux pas that have happened, and I'll use two very popular examples that you will know of. And there have been many more recent examples, but I use these old examples deliberately because it just shows how long-lasting the impact of these faux pas are. So if you think of the H&M example of the little black boy that wore the green sweater that said coolest monkey in the jungle, we all remember that. That was in 2015. That's 10 years ago. And we remember that so clearly because it was so impactful. When we see that example, or closer to home, the Clicks example of the hair, where there was a print ad that came out with a black woman's hair, a picture of a black woman's hair that had a caption that said dry, dull, frizzy hair, something like that, and a white woman's hair that said normal, healthy hair, or whatever, something along those lines, I paraphrase. When we see those examples, we think, sure, there must have been a lack of diversity in these teams. But I often think there might have been diversity in those teams, but perhaps there wasn't inclusivity, there wasn't psychological safety, there were unconscious biases that existed in those teams. Because if you think of the many layers of approval in organizations of that size that have to, that these pieces of communication have to go through for sign-off, somebody may have picked that up. But because of a lack of learner inclusion, as we call it, where I don't feel safe to speak up because it's not okay for me to make mistakes in this organization, I get punished. Or there might have been lack of collaborator safety where anytime I speak, I get dismissed. I'm made to feel small. I know that my opinion doesn't matter in this team. So in those instances, it is possible that somebody may have seen those things and thought, well, I'm going to watch this movie play out because I know what happens if I speak. And, you know, we've all seen the ramifications of those pieces of communication. Clicks ended up closing for like 4 days, 0 sales. That is devastating to any business. So if we take the example of marketing and think about inclusion in that space, you can see how critical it is to have it as an integrated aspect of your marketing and your business strategy. So DEIB as a strategy should never really sit alone. It should be integrated across the business with various functions asking themselves constantly, are we being inclusive? How is our team feeling? What sort of experiences are we creating for our different employees, for the different associates we have in the team? Do people feel comfortable to speak up, to share their thoughts, to share their opinions, to interrogate the strategy that we share, you know? In doing that, organizations are then better able to meet their KPIs. So DI or DIB initiatives or a DIB strategy should never just be a standalone, nice to have for the good times that HR holds when or if we have budget to do it.
True.
Yeah.
Okay, let's take a short break and we'll be back. With Connect HR, payroll is simple, accurate, and on time. We handle everything from tax calculations to compliance, ensuring stress-free processing every cycle. Let us manage your payroll so that you can focus on what matters. Connect HR, seamless HR solutions for the everyday company. Thank you, everyone, for staying tuned. We are back with Palesa, and she has touched on some amazing topics such as conscious bias, unconscious bias, as well as marketing and how it's interlinked to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And belonging. Woo, that's a mouthful. That's a mouthful. And I think I just want to ask the last question on the topic. Unconscious bias, right? So how can unconscious bias be addressed during performance evaluations and ensure fairness rather?
That's a great question, Bobby. It's, again, goes back to what I mentioned earlier around ensuring intentionality. So if an organization or if leaders are being intentional about being inclusive, then it is critical that there's diversity in the panels that are doing these evaluations.
Yeah.
That it's not always the same people. There is danger or risk of what we call conformity bias.
Okay.
Which is when we all simply conform to groupthink. So if we are sitting as leaders or as managers and we're doing a performance evaluation, and we all are people who think the same, we are similar in the backgrounds that we come from, in the schooling that we've done, in how we sound, how we behave, etc., etc. And then somebody has a thought about Palesa. And everyone thinks, don't know if she's the best performer, don't know if she is the best candidate for X opportunity or for this increase or promotion, etc., etc. It is very easy for that entire group then to just buy into that thinking, despite you as Babi, one of the managers in the group, having had a very different experience of me. So perhaps your experience of me has been actually Palesa has consistently delivered exceeding expectations.
Yeah.
She's consistently been reliable, etc., high performer. But you sit in these groups and you conform because everyone's kind of like the same.
Okay.
So it's important to have diversity in the group, to encourage a culture of challenging, ideas, of challenging opinions.
Yeah.
And importantly, to have standardized, structured criteria for development opportunities, for any kind of opportunity or for your evaluation. Use a standardized criteria so you don't have too many different opinions or personal experiences or how I feel about how Palesa greeted me this morning. Yeah.
Sure. And I think when we were having our discussion earlier, I mentioned to you that I'd like you to touch on the topic of allyship. So what is allyship for that don't know what that is?
I love the subject of allyship.
I know.
Because I believe that allyship is such a strong component that promotes inclusivity and supports inclusivity. Allyship is really about having individuals who are advocates, who are supporters of others who do not come from their same social group.
Got you.
Or those who are marginalized in some way or another.
Yeah.
And each one of us can be an ally. You know, I like to talk about women as allies of one another.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, sometimes I get the question, well, if we are all women and we are all people who have suffered from gender discrimination, gender injustices, how are we going to be allies for each other? So it's important that you do some introspection and really critically analyze your intersecting identities as a woman. So yes, we share that aspect. We're women.
Yes.
But, you know, consider your race, consider your sexual orientation, consider your nationality, etc., etc. So, for instance, you might be a woman living in South Africa. You're somebody who identifies as a woman and you're living in South Africa. Let's say you're Christian. Let's say you're heterosexual.
Yeah.
So, as a heterosexual Christian woman, you don't really need to think about your sexual orientation.
Yes.
You don't really need to think about your religious belief because these are heteronormative aspects of your identity, things that are considered to be normal. But if you are a Black woman from Zimbabwe who is also a lesbian, then you need to consider your nationality. You need to consider your sexual orientation because these things are not considered to be heteronormative in a lot of organizations.
100%.
And so as women, as a woman who might be a white Christian South African woman, you can be an ally to a Black Zimbabwean lesbian woman who is then often discriminated against on the basis of their nationality, sexual orientation.
Okay.
So you become an ally. And by being an ally, it's important to be an active listener, to really understand those pain points, those points of discrimination, what that person is telling you about what they are going through. And then to be an active advocate. So to speak up when you are seeing discrimination play out in front of you, to not just then go directly to that person and say, sure, that shouldn't have happened to you. No, you need to call it out in the room. You need to say, this is wrong, this shouldn't be happening. Okay. And to also find opportunities to promote that person, you know, in spaces where they might not be. So allyship is such an important component of promoting inclusivity in different ways, whether it's women being allies of women, whether it's men being allies of women, whether it's white people being allies of Black people, etc., etc., etc.
Oh. I hope you are learning a thing or two from this discussion. And finally, this is my last question to you. So what is the connection between allyship and creating an inclusive workspace?
So linked to what I've just mentioned now, allies are individuals who can and should be active in workspaces to ensure that inclusion is actually taking place. So if we are, for instance, in a meeting and Babi raises a point in the meeting and Tsepo starts to speak over Babi as she's talking, then it's important that an ally who perhaps is a man, for example, that they then speak up and say, hang on, Tsepo, Babi is talking.
Okay. Can
we just give Babi a chance to finish what she's saying? Or a thing that happens to so many women, an idea or a thought that you raise in a meeting is repeated by somebody else. And then people applaud the other person who's just said exactly what you've just said.
Yeah.
I mean, you talk to any woman and they'll be like, I know exactly what that is. So in an instant like that, an ally is somebody who then says, hang on, Babi just said exactly that same point.
Okay.
Thanks for reiterating what Babi just said, because that idea belongs to you, you know. And then you walk out of these meetings and an idea that you brought out is now being credited to somebody else, you know.
Yeah.
So it's important in workplaces that allies are people who speak up. And it's not to be mistaken for being a savior. So it's important how you approach these conversations, these calling outs as an ally, that it doesn't come across as like I'm trying to be your savior. No, I'm just somebody who is calling out injustices when I see them. I'm a person that, as a man or as a white person, and I'm at a braai and racist jokes are being raised, or sexist jokes, that I say, that's not cool, you know, and you say it to people and you make it known that that's unacceptable.
Okay. And in closing, what change would you like to see in the DEI space? DEIB.
I would like to see more authenticity in organizations, that DEIB initiatives are not just tick box exercises, that they are not things that organizations do to just be seen as doing good, that an organization that embarks on a journey of being inclusive does so authentically and does the work, doesn't just bring in people to train, put together a strategy that then gets shelved and never heard of again. That it's important that there are audits done every year to track progress. So we ran a training series on unconscious bias. How are we looking a year later? What are our teams saying? How are people feeling? Are people feeling more included? When we look at our gender pay gap, is it closing? Where are we sitting? So just ensuring that there is more doing than saying, this is what we're going to do. This is what it should be. And I believe if there is authenticity, when you decide to take that step as an organization, then you will do that. You'll make sure that you actually do the work.
Yeah, sure, Bali. And where can people find you on social media or any platform where they'd like to, maybe challenge what you're saying or maybe gain more information?
Find me on LinkedIn, Dr. Palesa Mahloele Munzara. I love writing on this topic. So you'll find my articles there. Feel free to contact me, challenge me, share your thoughts. I often say in the space that we operate in of DIB, dialogue is power. And the more we learn about difference, the more we learn, what we knew 5-10 years ago has moved on so much versus where we are now. So I love to be challenged. I love to get those questions because it helps me learn more, you know. And I think it's so important to have those ongoing dialogues with one another.
100%. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. This was a very impactful discussion in my view, and we hope to have you soon in the near future.
Thank you for having me. I'd love to be back.
Thank you, Bali. Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached the end of our episode. Please share your comments in the comment section. Maybe we have missed some things that you would have loved to hear. So this is your opportunity to share your thoughts. Signing out on episode 8 is your sizzling host, Babi Mawela. See you next time.